from here, and welcome back to another episode of the Lovable Survivor Podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the emotional roller coaster ride that is a stroke for brain injury and how to make that ride a little bit smoother. I think it goes without saying nobody is anticipating having a stroke or any sort of significant brain injury. It's going to be happening suddenly. It's going to be shocking. It's going to be a lot for for everybody involved. It's going to be involved. It's going to be a shock to you, to your body, to your system, to your loved ones, to your family, to your caretakers. It's going to be a wild ride. I say this every episode. If it's anything short of a wild ride, you are definitely lucky. And I wish I could say it would be easy, but I just don't think that's the case. However, we're going to go through the different phases of this roller coaster ride. The reason I call it a roller coaster is not really to be funny, because it is. There are lots of emotions that will come over a period of time. There are going to be ups and downs. There's going to be peaks and valleys. There's going to be setbacks. There's going to be issues along the way. Again, not to beat a dead horse here, but it is not a linear thing. It's just not. And to sugarcoat it and say, if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll be good. Again, I wish I could say that definitively. I think there are things you can do to really help. I don't know if speed up is the right word. I don't think there is anything you can do to speed up things because, again, age plays a factor, but it is not a clear factor in the recovery process. The goals, we talked about it last time. Goals depends on the goals. It depends on what significant changes you want to make on your journey, what significant changes you may have to make on your journey. And again, that's going to unfortunately look different for everybody. I would say if it feels wrong, trust your gut. I'm going to talk about some things that I think are things that I just didn't become aware of until later. And I don't know that people, honestly, there was nobody. I don't think at any point anybody I was working with avoided telling me things. It just, I don't know if it occurred to me or didn't occur to them. Combination. I think there's a lot of things that we often overlook. And I'll go through some of those things, but I think really as with every episode, we're going to start here at the beginning. Before I hop into things, I just want to remind everybody that's a listener, if you're interested in finding out more about survivor science and the community that I'm building, I definitely encourage you to go over to vip.survivorscience.com. I think the people that sign up early on, there'll be some significant discounts to join the membership community. I'm going to be looking for beta testers in the first couple weeks, hopefully coming up here at the end of March, beginning of April. So definitely sign up if you're interested in finding out more, potentially being an early adopter, an early member. Maybe you just want to get on the list for when we go kind of live to the public. If you're into discounts and kicking tires around, I would definitely encourage you to sign up. Feel free to send me a direct message if you have suggestions, tips, questions, anything, whether that's on Twitter. You can email the podcast. Everything's in the show notes. So that kind of leaves that there. And again, that's vip.survivorscience.com. I am working diligently to sort of merge some of these brands where survivor science is the community that I'm building. This show is called Lovable Survivor. It's possible I merge the two. It's possible I might rename this podcast after these first couple episodes. So we'll see where it goes, or I may just leave it to, I may have this show, and then I'll have sort of a second show of interviews later on under the Survivor Science brand, because that is the reason I'm separating them, is because currently I'm doing this podcast on my own, sharing my journey, the things that I find helpful, and things that others could find helpful, but maybe the community at large is part of Survivor Science. So, just bear with me while I work through those things. I'm just trying to be honest and clear. And, the two brands are very similar. They're pink and black. So I don't think there's a ton of confusion, but it is not as clear as one major umbrella. So right now it's Survivor Science is the community that will be built out. Lovable Survivor is the actual podcast currently that you're listening to, the YouTube channel, which is probably coming here in a couple weeks. I just want to get some, more things filmed and banked before I really release that to everybody. I think it'll be a nice compliment to this podcast. And I may add podcasts as well to that YouTube channel, because YouTube is clearly heading in the direction of podcasting as well. So yeah, lots of things going on. But back to this episode, I think, like I said, the big takeaway here is that it is going to be quite a ride. There are going to be lots of ups and downs. If you've ever been on a roller coaster, this is exactly what it's going to feel like. If you're in the middle of it, if you're near the end of it, you know that this is a wild ride. It is not easy. There are tons of stroke survivors, but there are unfortunately not a ton of resources out there. There are resources, but they're hard to find. It's nice to hear other people's stories. It's great to hear other people's stories. That's where I really want to take this podcast, is being able to just not only share my story and my journey, but share other people's journeys, because I think there are obviously lots of ways to navigate a stroke and the stroke recovery process. I am in a unique position that I'm a stroke survivor with MS. I also happen to be 40, which for all intents and purposes is pretty rare for a stroke survivor. As I've said before, average stroke survivor is around 65 years old. There are certainly younger stroke survivors than myself. There are older stroke survivors than myself. Not everybody wants to get to the same results at the end, whatever that looks like. My main focus is from people that are sort of stable and well and able to, get back to a life that maybe they were at before. Maybe it's slightly different. Maybe it's totally different, but it is one that they want to be fulfilling and enjoyable. And yes, there may always be some deficits and some obstacles and some things to work around, but ultimately you want to live, a healthy, enjoyable life. And I think, like I said, I'm going to share some of those things today. So I think we all know when you have and if you are new to being a stroke survivor, it's okay. Know this from day one. I mean, people are going to say this. You're going to roll your eyes. I'm rolling my eyes on the off camera as I'm saying it. It's different for everybody. It's overwhelming initially. There is a lot of shock. There is some fear. There's a lot of information coming downhill. All of it probably good. It'd also be completely overwhelmed. I will just say, try your best to take it in stride. You don't have to take all the information down. People will help support. People will remind you. People will constantly remind you, whether you want to be reminded or not. Your body will remind yourself. But I would say it starts with a valley. One of the things they put me on early on was an antidepressant. And that's because I had a stroke at 37. I have 3 kids. I have a wife. It was a lot. And I will say I am grateful that they did, because I don't know that I would want to meet the version of myself that had just had a stroke if I was not on antidepressants. Again, it's a lot of shock. It's anxiety. It's fear of the unknown. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you know everything has happened very suddenly where you are totally fine and then you're totally not. So, I think you need to talk to your doctors and your team, but certainly don't dismiss that as a way to help you in the beginning. And again, there might be physical and cognitive changes. Some you might recognize right away, some you may not be aware of. There's also going to be, I did not have terrible speech at the beginning. It wasn't until later on, being diagnosed with MS, that's when the speech took a hit. So, it gets pretty dark pretty early. And again, every stroke is different. You're going to have different issues than I had. You may have similar issues. You may snap back pretty quickly. You may not. And I think the sooner you realize there's no magic pill, it is a little weird to wrap your head around that one day you're fine and then the next day you're totally not. And I mean that in every sense. Like, I walked into the hospital 2 days later, I couldn't walk at all. And you think, okay, well, I just can't walk right now. And then you realize months down the road how long it takes to actually physically walk again. So, once you realize you're going to have to relearn some things that you already obviously have been working on for a significant portion of your life, depending on how old you are, you're going to need some support, whether that's, from professionals or just emotional support from family and friends and spouses in the early days. And I think everybody tries to keep positive outlook, but just know it's not so easy, and this is hard. It's really emotional. It takes a toll. It does. I think for me, I appreciated that I was still alive, and I really kind of clung to that pretty quickly. I knew it was going to be long, knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I just kept thinking, all right, I'm alive. That's amazing. This is clearly going to take more time than I'd like it to. I am known as a fixer. I like to fix problems pretty quickly. And it was very clear to me very early on that this would be a much longer haul. So I think that initial valley, there are, you can go over things in your head. I recommend trying to get out of your head as soon as possible. I don't know if there's a ton of benefits there, of course. Again, this is also some of the things I'm going to touch on throughout this episode. There are things that you can change pretty quickly once you've had the stroke. I mean, depending on your facility, obviously with this emotional roller coaster, you're in a valley. Your healthcare team is trying to get you stable. There are things you can work on very early on. Get proper sleep. Sleep as much as you can. It's good for your brain. Take note of that. I think reading helped quite a bit. I had trouble holding books, so I got into Audible, which I know may not be for everybody, but I think these things, if you can listen to things, if you can keep your brain going and moving, that's a lot more positive than it may initially seem. Your diet will probably be dictated by your medical facility. I think, you can complain all you want. I believe they will do their very best to feed you properly and get you on the right track. Another thing that I will recommend early on in this initial phase when you're kind of figuring out what to do and you may not be able to exercise because you may be wheelchair bound initially, is do not underestimate the power of both sleep and diet, but also breathing. And when it comes to breathing, I'm going to say nasal breathing specifically. I'm a big Patrick McGowan fan. In fact, I should probably reach out to him and talk to him at some point about sponsoring this podcast. But I feel like oxygenadvantage.com is Patrick McGowan's brand. He offers a lot of courses on there. He also offers certification, which I'm still in the process of finalizing. But it's something for me that I was unaware of how beneficial it could be in terms of blood flow, in terms of just overall health and wellness. There is a lot of power in breathing, especially nasal breathing. And this sounds basic to some people, but I was a pretty habitual mouth breather for most of my life. And that actually takes this pretty significant toll on your body, believe it or not. And so if you do find yourself wheelchair bound, you've got a little extra time. Obviously, diet will be controlled probably by your medical facility. Sleep, I think they encourage you to sleep, but also stay active. And part of staying active is walking. But if you can't walk, how do you stay active? My recommendation, again, is to look into nasal breathing. There are lots of exercises that you can practice. I think the eye-opener for me was realizing you could unblock your nose so that if you suffer from rhinitis or a stuffy nose or just have trouble in general breathing through your nose, just know that with a little bit of practice and some videos and the right, little bit of effort, you can really change your life. And I will tell you, I can't give you a better sort of testimonial to the power of nasal breathing than the last 6 months. I am a 6'8", 325-pound stroke survivor living with MS who has finally fixed his breathing from mouth breathing to nasal breathing. And I would say for the last 160 days, give or take, I have been running 10 miles a day. Now, I'm not running 10 of the fastest miles on the planet. I am definitely not Usain Bolt. I am a slow runner, but I am a runner. And again, I remind you, I'm 6'8", which is 2 meters if you're overseas, 325 pounds, which is a lot of freaking kilograms. I'm going to guess roughly 155 kilograms, give or take. I don't really know. And I don't feel like doing the math or Googling during the show here, but it's a lot of kilograms. It's a lot of height. It is very unusual. I would say I am not, from the looks of it, a typical body type for a runner of any kind, certainly not 10 miles a day. So I don't want you to underestimate the power of nasal breathing and just breathing in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be nasal breathing. I think that is ideal down the road, but you can fix your breathing by doing various exercises. So I got a little off track because I got a little passionate about breathing, but I think if you are on that roller coaster and you're in a valley in the early days, just know that this is something you can do, especially if you cannot actively walk with ease. And it is certainly something you could do while sitting down or even laying down, as a lot of the exercises honestly have you sit down or lay down. So that is something to look into. And again, Oxygen Advantage, Patrick McGowan, he's written a couple books, Breathing Cure, Oxygen Advantage, both great books, Atomic Focus. Definitely check them out. I think there are great resources. And again, I wish I just had tripped upon them sooner, because it's definitely something you could do early on. Now, once you are sort of stabilized and you're starting to get out of the valley and you're working with therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, you're going to be on a high. there are going to be progress points. Some of it will be quick. Some of it will not be easy. Some of it will be a pain in the ass. I think that goes without saying. If you are in therapies or have been in therapies, I think it differs for everybody. I've had great success in therapy. I continue to go in year 3+ here. Currently seeing a physical therapist and occupational therapist in my 3rd year. Again, I've said this before, I take advantage of every opportunity to get additional support at age 40 that I can get each year beyond what I can do for myself. That may not be for everybody. But if I'm paying for health insurance, I am going to use that health insurance, and I'm going to use it for the things that I need. And when I'm running, I want to be an even better runner. So why not? Yeah. That being said, I think you're going to experience, like I said, some highs. You're going to get some wins. It's going to ebb and flow. It's not linear. You're going to make progress in areas where you want to make progress. You're going to make very little progress sometimes in areas you want to make progress. It's just a constant assessing of where you're at, where you want to improve, talking to your team, talking to your family, talking to your caretakers. It's where you're going to learn a lot of grit and resilience. You're going to learn a lot about yourself. You kind of get 2 choices. You can give up or you can keep going. For me, just keep going. Easier said than done. Realize that, again, this emotional roller coaster, it's like 2 steps forward one day, sometimes 2 steps forward, 37 back. And it can be frustrating. I think it's very important to communicate constantly with your therapists and your doctors, because you want to make sure that when you're doing the work, you're not overdoing it, which I've been known to do at times. I think you need to really understand your body and, again, think of the wins. You take the wins as they come. Realize you'll have setbacks with those physical improvements. I think the same is true of cognitive and speech improvements. You're going to improve, but it's going to be like forward and back and forward and back. It's okay. They say it takes time, and they're not wrong. It takes time. It's painfully slow sometimes. So there are peaks and there are valleys, and that's just kind of natural the first couple of years. For me, the big one is when you sort of get to, I think the first 2 years it was peaks and valleys. First year, obviously more valleys, second year, more peaks, but still a mix of both. It wasn't really until last year where I got to sort of these plateaus that I guess I wasn't expecting, because it had been such an upward trajectory. I was still experiencing peaks and valleys, but the plateaus caught me a little off guard. And that's when I started getting into Peloton and running and looking into breathing. And that just kind of unlocked new doors. And that's really, not to tie this into what I'm doing with survivor science, but it is kind of very much that. I think you get to a point in your recovery journey where you're stable and healthy. But depending on your age and your situation, you may want more. And that more isn't always clear to the survivor or to the people around the survivor. Just honestly, to help. I think that's part of why there's a need for a larger communities. I think there are lots of professionals that want to help, but they don't often know as much, really, because they're not actually survivors. They see a lot of survivors, but it gets to a point where they've helped the survivor almost as much as they can. And then, sometimes they have support groups in these programs. Sometimes they don't. And you got to watch out for that. And they don't know where you want to go. So that's part of the reason for going back to therapy, is because I pay for health insurance, so I might as well take advantage of it. And also, there's nothing wrong with a plateau, but eventually you want to, I don't even know that you want to get off the plateau, but you want to go further forward, but in a safe way, because you don't want to cause secondary issues. So there's that. And I think, sometimes with that plateau, there can be an emotional setback because you're like, well, I'm good, but am I really good enough? Like, why can't I get there? These are questions that I had. And I don't know that I'll ever be able to call myself unstoppable, but I don't think I'm alone in wanting to just striving to keep getting better. And what I mean by better for me, at least, and again, this is going to vary from person to person, but I know that my life will never go back to exactly the way it was, but I would love to continue to make strides and effort and powerful progress in a way where things that are still taking a little bit more effort than I recall them taking or know that they should. I hate that word. I think when I think about walking, it still takes a little effort. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not mad about it, but I wouldn't mind if cognitively, mentally, and even physically, just a little bit better. May never happen, but corny as it sounds, as long as I'm breathing, I would like to keep trying. I am not giving up hope. And maybe it'll get to a point where maybe it's no longer that necessary. Maybe I just have to think about walking a little bit more. But I think there's always room for improvement. And I don't think this is specific. This might be in general in life. I don't think it's too much different for a stroke survivor other than you're a stroke survivor. So there's a little bit more mental over it, I think, than just being a non-stroke survivor, if that makes sense. It is life in general. You're going to have peaks and valleys and plateaus, obstacles to overcome or navigate around. And I think it's just different for a stroke survivor or brain injury survivor or autoimmune, individuals like myself. MS is autoimmune technically. So yeah. I know it's so cliche. It's so not helpful in the sense that, every stroke survivor's journey is unique and the progress is boring and as dry as it sounds. Maybe it sounds better coming from a fellow survivor than a medical professional, but it is honestly not linear because if it was, I assure you, I and a lot of other stroke survivors would have figured out the plan and given you all the exact plan that works to follow if such thing could be accomplished. However, again, going back to sort of the reason for doing this podcast and the reason for creating Survivor Science Community is going to be people coming together to help other individuals who are going through a similar experience, share those experiences to help navigate the peaks and valleys and all the emotional parts that go along with being a survivor in this sense, because I do believe it's a unique position to be in and to go through. And although you can communicate what this is like to other people, unfortunately, and honestly, I don't want other people to know what this is like because that means they're going to have to suffer a stroke. But the end goal really is to not just help stroke survivors, but maybe even, when I think about 30 years down the road, is there going to be a pill or some way to even reverse some of the negative effects of a stroke? medicine's come a long way in the last 30 years, and there's no reason to believe that couldn't continue. Obviously, brain and brain injuries are very complex. They're very individualized because every body and every person is unique in their physical makeup. There are hundreds of reasons one individual may have a stroke versus another. So that's why this is not so linear. There are a lot of pieces to the puzzle. But again, this is going to be, I think wrapping up, it is going to be a roller coaster ride. If you listen this far, it's going to be a roller coaster ride. I think my best advice, really, honestly, is buckle up, stick with it. It's hard, it's painful, it can be frustrating as hell. You're going to experience the widest range of emotions you probably have ever experienced in your life. But just know that for most people, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I don't want to say that with a definitive yes or no, but I do believe that medicine and therapies have come a long way, even in the last couple of years since my stroke, which was only 2019. It's now 2023. Just keep showing up and putting in the work, just like anything else in life. You may not get the exact results you're after, but I think waking up, taking care of your body, getting proper rest, proper sleep, doing all the little things now will pay dividends in the long run. And it's not to just be corny. That is, I could tell you that is true. It's hard to see sometimes, it's frustrating, but I feel like you can definitely see the results, and you put in the work. You take those tough days, you learn from them, you see how you can improve. And again, I think this is not just brain injuries or stroke or any of those things. I think this is life in general. Learn from mistakes you make, use every opportunity to learn and make improvements, obviously with the guidance of healthcare professionals, do things wisely and safely. But yeah, I think if you show up, you put in the work, it takes some time, but you'll get there. Just know that from a stroke survivor to other stroke survivors, I'm rooting for you. I hope you can do it. I know you can do it if you keep showing up, if you need help, if you need guidance, if you need anything at all, you have questions, feel free to email the podcast. I would love to answer questions, see how I can help support. And yeah, I think that will wrap it up there. And again, if you can, if you're a fan of this show, if you've enjoyed the show, if you've found these episodes helpful, please leave, either a comment or a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Good Pods is something that I think is really going to start to take off in a big way. But really, any one of your, however you consume this, whatever platform you like the best. I'm going to try to see what I can do as far as reach out to me if you do comment or do leave a review on the podcast. I'd love to see how I can help out in some way, shape, or form. And thank you for the review. So yeah, if you do leave a review, please reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm happy to see how I can help. And yeah, we'll leave it there for today. So thanks so much and bye.